husband, the dancer, Eric Johnson.
All right, good afternoon. I hope you're all well, and we've had an amazing week. If you came in later today, we just shared at the beginning of the gathering, we had a wedding this week. Our oldest daughter got married, and we now have a son in the family, so we're just loving every second of it, and we had a great time. So, and for those of you that are visiting today, whether it's for studio or you came because a family member, a friend, baby was getting dedicated, it's an honor to have you here, and we're glad you're here. We have a couple friends that are from the California area, Ben and Heather. Ben and I have been friends for, I think, just over 40 years now. We grew up together in Weaverville, and Ben is 3 years ahead of me, and so he was a senior in high school and I was a freshman, and he wouldn't let anybody mess with me. So freshmen obviously get trash canned or, they get messed with. But Ben messed with me, but he didn't let anybody else mess with me. But Ben and Heather have been some of our close friends for the last 25, 27 years as a married couple. And so they are here for the wedding, and they wanted to stay over for studio. And so if you have anything you just want to bless them with, a hug or high five or courage or something God's telling you, please tell them before they depart. And it's good to have you guys here. I'm going to continue a talk that we started 2 weeks ago. If you weren't here, we did a talk titled God on Mute. And we wrestled with the idea of free will, where God given us free will, but then we wrestled with God's will. And we wrestled with the paradox of that, the dichotomy of that, the dilemmas that are around that. And so in our team huddle before today, I said, we're going to continue the wrestling match today around this idea of how many of you have noticed where God doesn't often speak at your most important decisions that you need to make. And he seems to care a lot about the decisions that don't really matter, but the ones that really matter to you, he's very quiet. He seems to be on mute. And it's funny, we all want free will until that point comes. We want him to just make the decision, and then we get free will back. And that's just something we wrestle with as humans. It's one of the dilemmas of following Jesus. And one of the things we wrestled with a couple weeks ago was reality that when you say yes to Jesus, in one moment, this desire, this deep urge to please God enters into your soul. And it didn't exist before. You weren't thinking about pleasing God. You weren't thinking about selling everything or, whatever it was that cost a lot. You weren't thinking about it, but something happens when God comes in your life. All of a sudden, this desire to please him it shows up. And because of that, there's this dilemma that we face where we're like, we want to please God, but then there are points where we're not sure if this is what God wants or what I want or what somebody wants. And the challenge with that is we have oversimplified, or if I can say it this way, it's an oxymoron in some ways. We've complicated decision making, and we've reduced it down to every decision is right or wrong. And I proposed a couple weeks ago that I believe most decisions in life aren't right and wrong. It's an invitation to learn to dance with him. And so we wrestle with that, and we wrestle with a few other things. We wrestle with Christian superstition. It's amazing, Christian superstition, it plays a big role in our life. How many have ever been at a point where you're trying to make a decision and you're looking for a sign? It's amazing, you always find what you're looking for. I mean, it could be a squirrel running across the road, and you're like, that's it. I know I'm supposed to move to a different country now. And we have this Christian superstition where we always find what we're looking for. And we have this dilemma of wrestling with this reality of is that just a squirrel running across the road, or is that God trying to tell me something? And this is just the reality that we wrestle with. And the last thing I'll recap from a couple weeks ago is if God makes every decision for you, then you'll barely have nothing to give an account for at the end of your life. And I want you to just kind of sit in that for a moment, because we're going to go a little bit deeper into some of this thinking and some of this wrestle. If you're looking for definitive answers, I don't know if we're going to be able to get to definitive answers today. I think the definitive answer on this topic is actually a dimension of reality that you step into versus a point of this is right and this is wrong and this is what I'm supposed to do. We also learned that obedience is an entry level to a relationship. And for some reason in Christendom, in Christianity, obedience has been made the pinnacle of spirituality. I never want to diminish obedience to God. I would never intentionally do that, but I wanted to take a moment and pull that out of the equation and talk about obedience. Obedience is entry-level relationship with God. If you think that is the ultimate goal, then you will stay at a very base level. And when you get to the end of your life, you won't have much to give an account for because He made all the decisions for you. Now, that's not to diminish the role of obedience. I mean, in fact, I would propose this. When God said do X, it's so easy to make a decision. Now, some of you may be wrestling, well, I don't want to do what God tells me. That's a whole nother conversation. That's a whole nother dimension of reality that I'm not addressing right now. I'm addressing the reality and the assumption that the people in this room that say yes to Jesus, like you've given Him your life, and maybe you're wrestling with that, and maybe today I can bring you closer to this reality of giving your life to Jesus. But the reality of I'm obeying Jesus is easy. Like it's so convenient when God says, Eric, I want you to do this today. I'm like, man, it's so nice to not have free will for a second. Because now I just get to be obedient. So there's beauty in that. There's a place for it. But I would say that's entry level in the relationship. And so as we go into part 2 today, I want to propose some different ways of thinking and hopefully open up some dimensions in your own life and your own views and your own thinking. Have you ever wondered, are straight lines a human invention? It's actually very strong case that there's no straight lines in all of creation. Some of you right now are trying to think about all the straight things in life. Take a tree. It's not straight. There's irregularities in a straight tree. Take a ruler and draw a line with a marker. That's man-made. But anything in creation, look at the horizon. No, we learned that it has a curve to it. What about the light beam? What about a light ray? Gravity bends light. So this whole idea of something straight is actually a man-made concept. And technology is showing us this. When you look at the straight edge of a crystal, when you zoom into it, it's actually not straight. So the whole idea of something going straight is something that we've constructed. Some of you are still trying to find, you're thinking through everything, like, that's not true. That is so not true. Some of you, I lost you. I won't even get you back. I completely lost you. I have a feeling I'm going to get so many DMs this evening. You're so wrong. Look at this. Look at this. But I want you to think about that. There's actually nothing straight in all of the universe. And so we get tripped up on this word called timelines. We all have this timeline in our head. We have this linear view of time, like just going from here to there, and it's straight. And timelines are interesting. I've never met a human being yet in 47 years of living that have said, I am exactly where I thought I would be in my timeline. I've never met a human being that said, everything I thought and dreamed and planned has happened exactly to the date, to the second, to the moment. No one's ever said that. Because everyone in this room has a future timeline of when you think X and Y and Z should take place. And some of you are really wrestling with your existence because it hasn't happened yet. You're sitting there today and saying, man, I am X years old, and I'm nowhere near this point on a timeline. I thought it was going to be 10 years ago. Now I feel like I'm farther. There's nothing straight in the universe. But yet we've got a whole purpose, identity, and calling and sense of existence connected to this idea of this timeline. I should be here by then. I should be here by then. And if you're not, you are failure. You've made a bad decision somewhere. And maybe you have. But we've got to loosen up our construct around time. We've got to loosen up our construct around this idea of a man-made concept of this is when my life should look like this and look like this. And I've learned that if you move away from a linear concept of time, all of a sudden you have room for spontaneity. You have room for adventure. You have room for stepping into different dimensions of reality. But some of us just can't let go of this concept of linear time. I should be here by now. I should be here by now. And so we're living a life of continual frustration around this whole concept of time. And so when something doesn't happen in your timeline, you have to create a story around it. You're forced to. You're forced to create some story to justify why it hasn't happened yet. And the most common one in Christian circles is God didn't want it to happen. We laugh because it's so true. Like, oh, it must have not been God's timing. I didn't pray enough. I didn't do X, or I didn't do the right things. I must have messed up somewhere. The challenge with linear timeline, if you make 2 left turns, you're going backwards. If you make 2 right turns, you're going backwards. There's nothing linear in the universe, but yet we've summed up everything in existence to this idea of a line. And today I want you to move away from that for a moment and give yourself some freedom to think differently about your life and the decisions you've made or making. Because someone's like, I can't make too many left turns because I'm either going to be going in circles or I'm going to be going backwards. Maybe it's not linear. Maybe it's dimensional. And I would encourage you, I'm hoping by the end of this talk that you move away from one dimension of thinking into at least 2. The goal will be multiple. I want you to wrestle with your own existence and the idea of making decisions. And some of us are really, really trying hard to figure out, how do I make a decision when God is on mute? And I fasted. I fasted everything except water. I read my Bible from Genesis to Revelation in the first quarter of the year. And we do all this spiritual activity. I think it's beautiful. But there are lots of times God will stay on mute because He's building something in you. So I want to encourage you, move away. Move away from a linear concept of your life and think dimensional. Think about this decision that you're making will bring you an entire new dimension of reality that you didn't know existed. And when you start moving away from a linear concept of time, all of a sudden, you begin to realize nothing in my life goes to waste. Even if I made a bad decision, guess what? Somehow, that will be used to the benefit of my life and future. But when you have a linear concept of time and you make a bad decision, the timeline is completely destroyed and you live hopeless. You live with the sense of like, what can I do to get that back? And so we work extra hard to try to get back onto that line that we built. But when you move away from that, all of a sudden you have room for spontaneity. You have room for, oh, I have dimensions I get to experience. And then you begin to realize everything in my life will actually feed to something and nothing goes to waste. We love the concept of time travel because some of us wish we could go back in our lives and make a different decision. And so the whole concept of time travel is something that's fascinating. Now, there's a great movie called Napoleon Dynamite. It's one of the all-time classics. It's in color, so it's in... And Napoleon Dynamite, if you've not seen it, please don't rush out of here to watch it. I think, you make the decision for yourself. But there's a character in Napoleon Dynamite. His name is Uncle Rico. And Uncle Rico is this middle-aged man. And Uncle Rico, he'd been out of high school for a while. Like, he's nowhere near the age of a high schooler. But throughout the movie, he always talked about if the coach would have put him in the game at his senior year in high school, he would be a professional athlete by now. So his entire story that he's created around his timeline is back in a day that no longer exists. We have a joke in our house. When anybody in our house starts talking about what should have been or what ifs, we look at each other and say, Uncle Rico. There's a verse in Romans 12:2, I'll read it to you. It says, do not be conformed to the pattern of this world. Let's pause right there. There are patterns of thought in the world. There are world systems of thought that shape how you think. And Paul here says, don't be conformed by the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. As we move through life, as we move through different environments, different spaces, whether it's school, work, homes, family, relationships, all of that shapes and forms you. You can even create an environment, and at some point, it will now shape and form you. And so to think that you can't be influenced by your surrounding is naive, it's ignorant. And so that each of these spaces has unwritten limitations or boundaries. Like, I could go into each of your homes right now, and probably within an hour or two, maybe sooner for some, I'll be able to tell the unwritten rules in your home. Like, it's not on the wall. It's not like this is a rule in the house, or this is a core value in the house, or this is our mission of the family. It doesn't exist on the walls of your home, but it's in the air, the way you interact. And because of those dynamics, whether it's healthy, unhealthy, dysfunctional, it's all the above. And I can go in your home and I'd be like, oh, okay, this is how you function in this environment. And after a while, those limitations become imposed on you. And we actually self-impose these limitations on us. Like, if I want to stay in relationship with certain people, I have limitations. I put those on my life. If I want to function and exist in a certain environment, I have to put self-imposed limitation to exist in that environment. It's just the nature of processes and systems and cultures and environments. The challenge is when you're getting ready to move into your future, that's where the rubber meets the road. Now, the self-imposed limitations actually make sense in certain seasons of life. There's certain things you can do, and there's certain things you shouldn't do or can't do or shouldn't even think about doing. That's normal part of just doing life. But when you're transitioning into the future, the challenge is, if you don't know what those self-imposed limitations are, you will never step into the future. You will create a world that you're leaving all over again. Because you'll bring these self-imposed limitations and you'll recreate them here. So in this room, everyone has had a new school, a new church, a new family, a new workspace. And if you find yourself still frustrated in the new space after time has gone by, if you still find yourself, man, this stuff is everywhere. I thought I left it. No, it came with you because it's you. So these self-imposed limitations, if you don't take the time to identify these self-imposed limitations, your ability to make decisions will stay at base level. So anytime you move into the future, you have to identify these self-imposed limitations. Like, what are the things that I have imposed on myself because of the environments I'm in? And as I move away from it, I have to leave those limitations here. It sounds so easy. It sounds so romantic and like, oh, this is easy. Okay, these are my 3 self-imposed limitations. I'm just going to disattach them and leave them here. It's amazing how magnetic they are. Because now, You have an entire construct of a reality, a safety, a security, a knowing how to live and function. It takes so much courage to become naked, to become vulnerable, to become exposed. And that's the challenge. Most people don't, because they don't want to let go of the security, the comfort, and the knowing of how to exist. And you step into a space where none of it works. And you wish it would be a week. You wish it would be like a month at most. But when you're talking months, maybe even a year, 2 years, 3 years, it takes a lot of courage to ride that out. And everything in you, when you hit a hard moment in this season of life, everything in you wants to grab those self-imposed limitations and bring them into the future that you have created. But now, you're no longer moving forward. You just recreated your past. So the idea of letting go of these self-imposed limitations and moving into the future is not easy. I love Candace last week. She talked about second wind. This phenomena of second wind for athletes, when they endurance, when they push through that wall, there's a second wind. I feel like some of our second wind is connected to this reality. I've let go of everything. And I'm so exposed, so vulnerable, so naked, I feel like I'm just floundering out here. Don't go recreate your past. If you need a biblical reference for this, I will give it to you. Some of you are still stuck on the straight line thing. I don't even know if you made it this far into the talk. I'm going to read you a couple passages. I'm not going to give you time to turn there because we're just about out of time. But in Exodus and Numbers, there's 2 points in the story of the nation of Israel as they left Egypt. And if you're not familiar with the story, I apologize. I don't have enough time to unpack the context, but the story of Israel leaving Egypt is one of the most famous stories in all of human history. In fact, it shaped anybody, whether you're a Christian or not. You think about Moses. You think about a nation and the 10 plagues and leaving Egypt, moving into the promise, and our construct is always on, there's a promised land on my future, and we use this story, but there's a couple points in Exodus chapter 14, and the backdrop is nation of Israel had been in slavery and bondage for 400 years. How many would think 400 years would be enough motivation to move into your future? Is it just me, or are you guys with me right now? Okay, good. Maybe you all like bondage. I don't. Brandon, you're with me. Okay, thank you. In Exodus 14, they have now left Egypt. They're actually moving towards their promised land. And they come to this point where they're stuck, and they have water in front of them, and they have Pharaoh and his soldiers behind them. They're trapped. And so imminent death is in their face, and they're about to die, and this whole scenario is taking place. In Exodus 14, verse 10, it says this: as Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What is rational about that? Nothing is rational about that. What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. 400 years of slavery seemed like it would be enough motivation to move in your future, and it's not. And I would propose some of us are still stuck in a season of life because we're unwilling to let go of self-imposed limitations. Let me read one more verse. Numbers 11, verse 4 and 6. This is farther down the road. They ended up being in the wilderness for about 40 years, which only should have took them about 2 to 3 weeks to get to the promised land. In verse 4 of chapter 11, it says, the rabble with them began to crave other food. And again, the Israelites started wailing and said, if only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost, also the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. But now we have lost our appetite. we never see anything but this manna. So they, in their moment of stepping into the promised land, wanted to go back and live in their past. It's because there are self-imposed limitations that will always keep you there. And if you don't identify them, you'll just recreate it again. I'm going to end quickly because we have a lot of kids in the back that need you. Start making decisions. Here's some takeaways. Start making decisions that break off limitations and boundaries that are no longer for you. They no longer need to exist in your life because you're creating a future that's full of promise and beauty. Don't create a future with today's limitations. One thing I have learned in ending self-imposed limitation is you step into a space where you feel naked, vulnerable, and exposed. This is because the systems and processes that clothed you were covering up what needed to be set free. It is not just enough to just want freedom. You have to be willing to come face to face with your fears, your need for control, and the way you see the world. Lastly, and not leastly, your ability to make decisions and types of decisions you make is directly connected to how small or how expansive and dimensional your thinking is. So why don't you stand? How many are still with me? Some of you are going to go Google straight lines. I can feel it. I can feel it in the air. As we wrestle with free will and God's will and the future and the present and the past, I want you to wrestle with yourself. I want you to wrestle with this hard. Some of you are like, how come we're not talking about this, or how come we're not talking about that? I'm telling you, if you grasp this, you'll start experiencing the thing that you've dreamt about. You'll start experiencing things that want to be free inside you will now be able to be free. And so I believe sometimes God doesn't give you the direct answer of what to do because he wants you to come face to face with yourself. And he wants you to wrestle with your existence and why you're here and come to a deeper understanding of how he's created the future for you. So Father, I pray for every person in this room today. I pray that what was talked about today and what was talked about a few weeks ago, I pray that we are moving to a dimensional thinking and not be stuck to just a linear way of thinking. I pray for people in this room that are wrestling with major decisions in their life right now. I pray that you put courage in their soul today. Put the ability to go, you know what? I'm willing to let go of an environment, of limitations. I'm willing to let go of that to step in so I can be fully free in you. And I pray for people today that are wrestling with their own purpose and existence in life. I pray this talk helped to get them closer to the reality of what it means to have purpose and calling and destiny and all these things that we talk about. And so I bless every person in this room today. I want every eye to stay closed for a moment. I want to give an opportunity for people in this room to get right with God. Maybe you feel a sense of just being dead. You don't feel alive. You feel like you're just in the rut. You're just in routine. You're just in ritual. Or maybe you've recognized that you've been running away from God. But today you want to make that right. If that's you, I want to give you an opportunity. Raise your hand right now if you can. And what you're saying is, I want to get right with God. I want to move from death to being alive. If that's you, wave at me so I can see you. I'm just going to look around the whole room before we close today. Okay. All right. So Jesus, we bless everyone in this room. And everybody said? Amen. Amen. Before you go, if we could have our team, our studio home pastor, any of our leadership team,